There's a lie we all learn in school as children, that America was discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1492. It wasn't. Almost 500 years before Columbus was even born, men from the frozen north had already set foot on this continent, and the proof lies buried on a forgotten tip of Canada. His name was Leif Erikson, a Viking, and scientists today know the exact year his people cut down trees on American soil, 1021 AD. Not around then, the exact year. And the way they figured it out is one of the most incredible stories in modern archaeology. But to understand how a Viking reached the New World before any other European, we have to start with a man who was banished from 2 countries for murder. That man was Leif's father, and his name was Eric the Red. Eric earned that nickname for 2 reasons: his red hair and beard, and the blood he spilled. In 10th century Iceland, Eric got caught up in a feud that ended in death. The punishment was exile, 3 years banished, forbidden to return. He had nowhere to go, so he did what no sane man would do. He pointed his ship west, toward the empty ocean. Out there, in the middle of the frozen nowhere, he found a vast land buried in ice. It was harsh, brutal, almost without trees. But Eric was, above all else, a brilliant salesman. He named that block of ice Greenland, on purpose to lure settlers. It may have been the first real estate fraud in history, and it worked. Hundreds of people set sail chasing the dream of the Greenland. It was there, in that colony founded by an exiled murderer, that a boy grew up who would change history without ever knowing it. Leif, son of Eric. Remember that name, because what he was about to do, the world wouldn't understand for 1,000 years. Before we go on, I need to destroy an image in your head. That Viking helmet with 2 horns? It never existed. It's pure invention. Not a single horned Viking helmet has ever been found by archaeology. Not one. And later in this video, you'll discover exactly where that lie came from. And the answer involves a German theater. The real Viking wore a simple helmet of iron or leather with no decoration at all. And he wasn't just a bloodthirsty raider. He was a farmer, a trader, and above all, the finest navigator the world had ever seen. Men who crossed the most treacherous ocean on the planet with no compass, no map, and no GPS. How did they do it? By the position of the sun and the stars, and by a technique called dead reckoning, calculating speed, direction, and time in their heads. The sagas even speak of a magic stone, the sunstone. A crystal that revealed where the sun was even under a cloudy sky. Scientists tested it. A type of Icelandic crystal really does exactly that. And the ships? Forget the long, narrow warship, the longship with a dragon's head on the prow. To cross the North Atlantic, the Vikings used a different kind, the Nar. Wider, deeper, sturdier. Capable of carrying up to 30 tons of cargo, cattle, food, whole families. It was the moving truck of the medieval world. But the discovery of America didn't begin with Leif. It began with a man who got lost. Around the year 985, a trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson was sailing to Greenland when a storm threw him far off course. When the fog lifted, he saw, on the horizon, a land no one knew. Hills, forests. It wasn't frozen Greenland. It was something else. And here's the detail that says everything about that era. Bjarni looked at a new, unexplored land and did not go ashore. He just wanted to get home. He turned his ship around and left. Bjarni Herjolfsson may have been the first European to see America, and he simply shrugged. The glory would go to another man. That other man was Leif Erikson. When Leif heard Bjarni's story, a land full of forests, seen but never touched, he couldn't get it out of his head. He bought Bjarni's very ship. He gathered a crew of 35 men, and he decided to do what Bjarni hadn't dared, go there himself. Around the year 1000, Leif set sail from Greenland into the unknown, retracing Bjarni's route in reverse, from the ice heading west, toward the place where the mysterious land had been sighted. 35 men in an open wooden boat against the North Atlantic, with no idea whether they would ever return. The first land they found was miserable, flat rock and glaciers, no grass. Leif named it Helioland, land of the flat stones. Today historians believe it was Baffin Island, in the far north of Canada. He didn't even stop. He pushed south, looking for something better. The second land was better, covered in dense forests, with long beaches of white sand. Leif called it Markland, land of forests. It was probably the coast of Labrador. For a Greenlander who lived in a land almost without trees, an entire forest was a treasure. Timber was worth gold. But Leif wanted more. He kept heading south. And then they arrived. A land of mild climate, rivers full of salmon, green meadows, and, according to the sagas, wild grapes growing free. To a Viking, grapes meant wine. So Leif named that place with the name that would echo for 1,000 years, Vinland, the land of wine. They had found paradise, and they would spend the winter there. Leif built houses of wood and turf, a camp that would become known as Leif's Booths. And here comes the detail that science would take 1,000 years to confirm. That camp was not a legend. It existed, and we know exactly where it is. In the summer of 1960, a Norwegian couple of explorers, Helga and Stein Ingstad, arrived at a fishing village on the northern tip of Newfoundland, in Canada. They asked the locals whether there were any ancient ruins nearby. A local fisherman pointed to some grassy mounds with strange shapes. "We always called it the old Indian camp," he said. He was wrong. When archaeologists excavated, they found the impossible. The outlines of 8 buildings of wood and turf, identical to the Viking houses of Iceland and Greenland. The place is called Meadows, and it was, beyond any doubt, a Norse settlement on American soil. The physical proof that the Vikings reached America before everyone else. Among the finds was something small and definitive, a bronze cloak pin, exactly the type used by the Vikings, and a stone spindle whorl for spinning wool. That whorl changes everything. Spinning wool was women's work. In other words, these weren't just warriors passing through. There were women there. They were trying to settle, to live, to raise families in that land. For decades, scientists knew that the Vikings had been there, but they didn't know exactly when. Estimates range from 990 to 1050. Until, in 2021, 3 scientists solved the mystery with one of the most brilliant techniques science has ever invented. And the secret was hidden inside the trees. The story of this discovery begins in space. In the year 993 AD, the sun unleashed a monstrous burst of radiation, a gigantic solar storm. A wave of ultra-high-energy particles swept across the entire Earth. It was an event so rare that it happens perhaps once every 1,000 years. And here's the magic. Every living tree that year absorbed a spike of that radiation and stored it forever inside a single growth ring. Every tree on the planet gained, in that year of 993, an invisible mark, an identical cosmic signature, like a stamp from the universe pressed into the wood. Scientists took pieces of wood cut by the Vikings at Meadows. They found the ring bearing the 993 stamp, and then it was just a matter of counting the rings outward, one by one, all the way to the bark, to the exact edge where the tree was felled by a Viking axe. The number of rings after the stamp was always the same, 28. 993 plus 28 makes 1021. In 3 different pieces of wood, cut from 3 different trees, the answer was identical, the year 1021 AD. For the first time in history, we know the exact year Europeans were in the Americas. Not a guess, a date carved in stone, 1021. Think about the weight of that. In 1021, the Vikings were cutting down trees in North America. That is exactly 1,000 years ago. And it is 471 years before Columbus reached the Caribbean in 1492. Nearly half a millennium head start. The history they taught you in school is, literally, 5 centuries out of date. But Leif's voyage was only the beginning. The sagas tell that, after him, other Vikings tried to do what he had not merely visit Vinland, but colonize it, live there forever. And it was in that attempt that everything began to go wrong. Because America, they would soon discover, already belonged to someone. The man who truly tried to colonize was named Thorfinn Karlsefni. Around the year 1004, he organized the largest expedition yet, about 130 people in 3 ships. He brought men, women, tools, and, crucially, cattle. Whoever brings cattle and women isn't passing through. He's coming to stay. Traveling with Thorfinn was his wife, Gudrid. And in Vinland, around the year 1005, Gudrid gave birth to a boy named Snorri. That baby holds a title few people know. Snorri was the first child of Europeans born on the American continent, 500 years before any Spanish, Portuguese, or English colony. The first American of European blood was born in a Viking hut. At first, it worked. The Vikings explored, fished, cut timber. And then, one day, they appeared. From the forests, from canoes, people emerged. The inhabitants of the land. Native Americans, probably ancestors of the Mi'kmaq or Beotic peoples. The Vikings, not knowing their name, called them Skraelings. The first contact wasn't war, it was trade. The Skraelings brought rich furs and wanted to trade. The Vikings offered red cloth and milk. For a while, it worked. Furs going one way, red cloth the other. Two worlds that didn't even know the other existed, bargaining on a North American beach 1,000 years ago. But the peace was fragile. According to the saga, the first spark was absurd. The bull the Vikings had brought broke loose and came charging and bellowing toward the natives. The Skraelings had never seen an animal that size making that noise. Terrified, they fled. The trust cracked. And what came next was blood. Not long after, the trading turned into battle. The natives attacked in force. And here is the fact that seals the fate of the Vikings in America. They were pitifully few. A few hundred at most. The Skraelings were the entire population of a continent. The Vikings had iron weapons, but iron is no use against endless numbers. The saga tells that, at the height of the desperation, a pregnant Viking woman named Freydis, daughter of Eric the Red and half-sister of Leif, grabbed the sword of a fallen comrade, bared her own breast, and slapped the blade against it, screaming with fury. The natives, faced with that sight, fell back in fear. Truth or legend, it's one of the most savage images in the sagas. But courage couldn't beat arithmetic. Thorfinn understood the hard truth. You couldn't conquer an entire continent with 130 people, isolated, with no reinforcements. When Snorri was about 3 years old, the family gave up. They packed everything, boarded the ships, and sailed back to Greenland. Vinland, the paradise, was abandoned. So why didn't the Vikings, the greatest navigators of their time, keep America? The answer has 3 parts, and all of them are fascinating. The first you've already seen. They were pitifully few against overwhelmingly many. A handful of settlers had no chance against the population of an entire continent that didn't want them there. The second reason is distance. The nearest base was Greenland, and Greenland itself could barely sustain itself. It was a small, poor colony on the edge of survival. Sending reinforcements to an even more distant land, across a deadly ocean, was impossible. The Vikings of Vinland were alone at the end of the world. And the third reason is the simplest of all. They didn't need to. The only thing in Vinland worth much was timber. And timber they could fetch from Markland, closer, without having to face the Skraelings. Risking their lives to colonize a hostile place wasn't worth it. It was easier to grab the timber and go home. But they didn't forget America all at once. There are records that the Greenlanders kept sailing to Markland for timber for more than 300 years after Leif. The last known mention of a Norse voyage to America is from 1347, almost exactly when the Black Death was beginning to sweep across Europe. And here the story turns sad. The Greenland colony itself, the Vikings' bridge to the New World, was dying. The climate cooled, the period scientists call the Little Ice Age. The crops failed, the ships stopped coming from Norway. Around the year 1450, the last Viking colony in Greenland simply vanished. And with it, the path to America closed. When Greenland died, the memory of Vinland died with it. It became just a legend told in Icelandic sagas, which most of the world took to be fiction. That's why, when Columbus discovered America in 1492, no one in Europe remembered that men from the north had already been there nearly 500 years before. The sagas, the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, were written in the 13th century, more than 200 years after the events. For a long time, scholars treated them as fairy tales. Wine in North America? A pregnant Viking woman with a sword? It seemed too much like fantasy, until two things changed everything. The first was 1960, with the discovery of Leif Meadows, the physical proof, in the ground, that the Vikings had been there. The second was 2021, with the solar storm recorded in the trees, giving the exact year, 1021. Science confirming, 1,000 years later, a story that seemed like myth. The sagas, after all, were right. Now, the promise I made back at the start. Where did the horned helmet come from, if no Viking ever wore one? The answer is surprising, from an opera stage. In 1876, in Germany, the composer Richard Wagner premiered his epic, The Ring of the Nibelung, a grand opera based on Norse myths. Wagner's costume designer, a man named Karl Emil Doppler, needed dramatic visuals. So he put horns and wings on the characters' helmets, to make them look more savage and theatrical. It had no historical basis whatsoever. It was pure stage aesthetics. But the image was so powerful that it caught on. Within a few decades, the horned helmet was already in paintings, children's books, product packaging. The opera reached the United States in 1889, and the horned Vikings landed for good in the popular imagination. Today, 150 years later, almost everyone on the planet knows that Vikings wore horns. And almost everyone is wrong. A theater costume defeated real history. There's even a curious theory about where Doppler got the idea, from the buffalo headdresses of Native Americans. If that's true, there's an enormous poetic irony here. The fake Viking got his horns inspired by the very people the real Vikings met and feared in America. History plays tricks like that. So let's separate the myth from the real. The real Viking had no horns on his helmet. He didn't discover America by accident. Leif went on purpose, chasing a land that had already been sighted. And he conquered nothing. He was driven out by a continent full of people who had already been there for thousands of years. The truth is less Hollywood and far more human. Because think about the scale of the feat, even so. In open wooden boats, with no compass, guided by the sun and the stars, a handful of people crossed the most dangerous ocean in the world and touched a continent that Europe didn't even know existed. 500 years before anyone else. And then went back to tell the tale. Leif Erikson earned a nickname after those voyages, Leif the Lucky. But it wasn't luck. It was courage, skill, and the refusal to accept the limits of the known world. While Europe believed the ocean to the west held only monsters and the edge of the world, a Greenlander simply went and saw it with his own eyes. And what he found changed our sense of who arrived first. Today, the United States celebrates Leif Erikson Day every 9th of October, an official date created by Act of Congress to remember that the story of the discovery of America is far older and more complicated than 3 Spanish caravels. It's worth remembering, of course, an even greater truth. Neither the Vikings nor Columbus discovered America. When Leif set foot in Vinland, millions of people had already lived on the continent for more than 15,000 years. The true discoverers of America were the ancestors of the peoples the Vikings called Skraelings. The Vikings were only the first Europeans to arrive, and the first wave was driven out. The discovery of Leif Meadows is so important that the place became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the first cultural site of its kind to receive that title in 1978. Today, tourists walk over the grass where, 1,000 years ago, Vikings raised huts, spun wool, repaired ships, and gazed at the west of a continent no one in Europe imagined. And there are still mysteries. Where exactly was Vinland, the land of the grapes? Leif Meadows lies too far north for grapes to grow. Many archaeologists believe it was a base camp, and that the Vikings explored farther south, perhaps as far as New Brunswick or Maine, where wild grapes really do exist. The full map of the Viking voyages in America has not yet been fully drawn. In 2012, there even arose the possibility of a second Viking site, at Point Rosie, farther south in Newfoundland, spotted by satellite imagery. Later excavations proved inconclusive, but the search goes on. It's possible that even today there are Viking ruins hidden beneath the grass of North America, waiting to be found. Because every time we think we know history, the Earth hands us a surprise. A bronze pin, a tree ring with a stamp from space, a grassy mound of fishermen called the Old Indian Camp. Tiny fragments that rewrite 5 centuries of everything we thought we knew. So let's recap the scale of this story. A man was exiled for murder and founded a colony on a land of ice. His son heard of a land sighted by a lost navigator and decided to go. He crossed the North Atlantic in a wooden boat and touched America 500 years before Columbus. Another group tried to stay. They had the first European baby born on the continent. They traded furs with the natives, and they were driven out by them. They went home, and the whole story was nearly lost forever, saved only by some sagas no one took seriously, until the Earth and the stars confirmed every word. The most astonishing part may be this. The final confirmation came from a storm on the sun, occurring in the year 993, recorded in trees the Vikings felled in 1021, read by scientists in 2021. 1,000 years separate the Viking axe from the modern laboratory, and the two met in a wooden ring the size of a fingernail. This is the most beautiful thing about history. It isn't frozen in books. It's alive, changing, waiting for the next discovery. What we know about the past is only what we've been able to prove so far. And tomorrow, an excavation, a tree ring, or a satellite could turn it all upside down again. The Vikings didn't conquer America. They didn't found an empire there. They left no cities behind. By a cold measure, they failed. They tried to colonize and they left. But they did something no one else in Europe had done, and no one would do for half a millennium. They went, and that, alone, is enough to rewrite history. Picture Leif Erikson gazing west, there from frozen Greenland, knowing there was a land full of forests beyond the ocean. Everyone said it was madness, that the sea had no end, or that it held monsters. He went anyway, and he found an entire continent. Curiosity beat fear. It always does. There's a lesson in this that reaches across 1,000 years. The limits of the world are almost never real. They're only the point up to which someone has had the courage to go. Europe thought the world ended at the Western Ocean. A Greenlander in an open boat proved it didn't. The edge of one generation's map is the starting point of the next. And that's why this story still matters 1,000 years later. Not because of swords, or fake horns, or battles, but because it's really about looking at the unknown and deciding to go see. About refusing to accept that it's this way because it's always been this way. Leif didn't accept it, and that's why we still talk about him. Next time someone tells you Columbus discovered America, you'll know the fuller truth. That almost 500 years earlier, a Viking named Leif Erikson set foot in the New World. That a baby named Snorri was born there. That all of it is proven by a turf hut and by a star that exploded in 993. And that history is almost never as simple as school makes it sound. The Vikings came, saw, and left. But for one moment, 1,000 years ago, two worlds that didn't know the other existed touched on a cold northern beach. Europeans and Americans, face to face, centuries before any book said was possible. And that beach is still there. You can visit it. In the end, Aux Meadows is just this, a few grassy mounds, in a windy, remote corner of Canada. Easy to walk right past without noticing. But beneath that grass lies one of humanity's greatest hidden truths, the proof that the courage of a few men, 1,000 years ago, reached where no one imagined possible. And you know what's most incredible? They never knew the scale of what they'd done. To Leif, to Thorfinn, to Gudrid, it was just one more voyage, one more land, one more attempt that didn't work out. They died without knowing they had reached America first. It took 1,000 years for the world to understand the greatness of what those few had done. If this story caught you off guard, do one thing for me. Comment down below what shocked you most. The exact year recorded in the trees, the baby born in America, or the fact that the horned helmet is pure German theater. And if you love history told the way it deserves, real, surprising, and impossible to forget, subscribe to World and Stories. Because the world is full of buried truths, waiting for someone to have the courage to go and look. Exactly like Leif did. 500 years before Columbus, a Viking touched America. History nearly forgot, but the earth and the stars remembered. Until the next story.